Hello, my name is Nell and I have things to say. You may have been told at some point in your life that your mental health and your mental illness is all in your head. Well, I've got news for you. It absolutely is. Yeah, your mental illness all up here. Because that's where your brain lives. And mental illness and mental disorders are disorders and diseases of the brain. They literally exist in the physical bits of your brain. They're not in your imagination. I guess they are all in your mind, but your mind is just an abstract concept related to your brain. Your mental health and your mental illness is all in your head. It's all in your brain. Let's talk about how that works. I'm going to try to do my best on getting all the accurate information. I've tried this before, and I'm doing it again. So let's start with how messages are produced and how messages are sent around the brain. Neurons. We'll start with neurons. Neurons are cells that send messages throughout the body. They send messages to muscles, to nerves, to glands, that tells them when to produce what physiological responses to what stimuli. It'll tell your muscles to feel things, to start movement. It'll tell your nerves to feel pain or to feel pleasure. It will tell your glands to produce certain hormones, certain chemicals. Now, for one neuron to communicate with another neuron, it crosses a synapse. It's kind of like a bridge. And once that is crossed, it creates a neurotransmitter. That's a chemical that is the actual message that the brain is sending out to tell everything else what to do. Now, 3 of those neurotransmitters are dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. And they're the ones that are really related to mental health and mental illness. You might have heard of them. You've probably at least heard of dopamine and serotonin. So dopamine is related to want, desire, arousal, pleasure. Serotonin is related to mood control, memory, thinking, and learning. And norepinephrine is related to decision making and alertness and paying attention. Now, in a healthy brain, these neurotransmitters are produced in a healthy, balanced way that's appropriate to the stimuli. That it's something where, in a healthy brain, if you experience something that is good, that is joyful, your brain will produce dopamine, so you'll feel pleasure. If you are trying to remember something, if you are, if your serotonin levels are healthy, then you will have a decent memory, being able to recall things. You'll also be able to balance your mood in an appropriate way. With norepinephrine, if you in a healthy brain, norepinephrine will be produced when it needs to be, when you are under threat and you actually need to be alert and make decisions. Where the issue comes is when these neurotransmitters are not produced in a balanced and appropriate way. And now sometimes the neurotransmitters and these chemicals can get out of whack through life experience. Certain experiences in life will change the way your brain actually behaves. It might change the way your synapses work. I know for me in particular, one of my medications is known to slow down the brain's ability to rebuild synapses. So when the messages get sent from one neuron to another, it relies on this synaptic bridge. In my brain, those bridges don't last as long and they don't get repaired quite as quickly. Sometimes it's a genetic thing. Some people are born with chemical imbalances if there's been like a genetic history of not being able to produce enough dopamine, serotonin, etc. And so when we develop mental illnesses, it can be seen in our brain and in these chemicals that we are producing or not producing. So I've got a few examples of mental illnesses and mental disorders that are related to these neurotransmitters. For example, depression. Depression often occurs when the brain is not producing enough serotonin, because that's linked with mood control. So instead of you having appropriate responses to the things around you, your brain is just unable to respond in a healthy way. Something will happen that should cause joy and you do not feel joy. It's also why people with depression often have memory issues, because serotonin is required for recalling memories, for making memories. And so if your serotonin production is too low, not only will you be depressed, but you'll also struggle with your memories and with memory loss. And that's often why grief is associated with memory loss, because that serotonin is not being produced appropriately anymore. PTSD, that's often connected with too much norepinephrine. So instead of only producing norepinephrine in situations that actually require you to be alert, the body is producing too much for situations where it's not appropriate. That's why if you have PTSD, you will have those intense flashbacks at something that is rather innocent and not particularly triggering to anybody else, but it will trigger that in somebody with PTSD or with panic disorders and things like that. You are then hypervigilant when you don't need to be, because your body and your brain is telling you, danger, danger. You have to make a decision quick. You have to think fast. You are in fight or flight mode. You're in survival mode. People with OCD often produce not enough serotonin and too much norepinephrine. So again, it's that panic response that is inappropriate to the situation, and also you're not able to moderate your mood. I know for me with OCD, things seem like the end of the world if I'm not able to, I guess, fulfill my compulsive actions. People with anxiety, there's often, again, too much norepinephrine, so everything seems like a life or death situation, and not enough serotonin because you're not moderating your mood. Even things like addiction is, if you're not producing dopamine, then you're more likely to experience addiction issues because your brain is pursuing something else that can trigger that dopamine. You're not getting the usual hit that a lot of people would from something, so you need to continue chasing it. So a lot of mental health disorders have physical, real links in the brain. There's evidence for them in the brain. And it means that they are real. They're as real as any other illness. I think some people struggle to believe in mental illness because they can't see it. And so they assume that it probably doesn't exist. Whereas they feel like they can see other illnesses. But the thing is, all we ever see with illnesses are the symptoms. Even if you look at somebody with a cold, if you see them sneeze, the sneeze isn't the illness. The sneeze is a result of the illness. You're not seeing the virus in their bloodstream. You're just seeing the result. So with mental health, just because you can't actually see the way the cells are working in somebody's brain does not mean that it's not there. If you see the results of mental illness, if you see the symptoms, that's the evidence of it being there. So if you are somebody who has been told that your mental illness is all in your head, please remember that that's absolutely correct, because your mental illness is in your brain. That's why medication works too, because it actually gives your brain what it's not producing. I have major depressive disorder, so I take medication that helps my body, that boosts the amount of serotonin my body produces. People with PTSD can take something like beta blockers that will actually kind of dampen down the norepinephrine response. Medication for mental illness works because mental illness is a disorder of the brain. It's like any other medication. It is actually targeting something internally, something physical, to balance things out. So if you have been told that your mental illness is not real because it's all in your head, please remember that it is absolutely real. If you've been told that you shouldn't take medication because medication for mental illness just does nothing, please remember that medication for mental illness has a direct response. It directly targets the issue. So please take your meds. If you need meds, take your meds. There are a lot of things that we can do that can boost serotonin and dopamine and level out norepinephrine, things that aren't directly related to medication, and those are excellent things. And sometimes it's a mixture of both. For me, therapy and medication and little habits that I get into that seem to balance things out. But it's a good healthy mix, and it's hard to get to, but it's worth it. Your mental illness is all in your head, because that's where your brain lives. All right, that's all for this one. Bless.